Welcome to Thriving is the Goal, a podcast about how to thrive in work and life. My name is Tim Chan. I'm a business coach. I run a small marketing company, and I'm also a certified working genius facilitator.
My name is Mark Letchumanan. I'm a chartered financial analyst, executive coach in training, and a student of small business.
This episode will do a deep dive on enablement and tenacity. So for those of you that are just tuning in, you can go back to episode 2 to listen to a deep dive on wonder and invention, the first two working geniuses. Episode 3 is discernment and galvanizing. And today's episode, we'll talk about the geniuses of enablement and tenacity, what the geniuses feel like, what the frustrations feel like, tips for people with this as a genius and as this as a frustration, what people with this genius crave and are crushed by, and what teams are like without this genius.
And so when thinking about the genius of enablement, this is not to be confused with the negative term enabling or enabler, which is often related to encouraging someone along or helping them in their bad habit or addiction. We're talking about enablement as a genius, which has more to do with serving and support and coming alongside others to help them in a positive way.
Let's jump into enablement. Mark, can you talk about what enablement as a genius feels like?
The genius of enablement stems from, I believe, a good and healthy need to be needed by others. And when you have this need or drive as a human, this leads to relishing opportunities where you can help others. You're constantly looking for where you might be able to bring some light or joy, and this in turn gives you a lot of joy in your life. So people with the gift of enablement, they love knowing that they're making a difference with their words, with their comfort, with their nurture and actions. I was reading about the Enneagram type 2. That's a whole other conversation, but type 2s by nature love to help others. They're very service oriented. They get a lot of energy and joy from providing encouragement or assistance on projects. Individuals with enablement come alongside and they put their arm around you and help you with whatever it is you're going through. They don't just want to get you out of the way so they can do this work for you. They really want to see you grow and come out of it. And they want to enjoy the benefit of seeing you smile and light up and work your way through. That is very satisfying for individuals with enablement. Even though people with enablement are often ideal team members, they sometimes discount the importance of their genius, mistakenly believing that they're simply amenable or nice. But this is truly a special gift to be able to serve without necessarily expecting something in return. And you'll often find individuals with the gift of enablement in service or hospitality oriented professions. When you think of those teachers who are really caring or considerate, nurses, doctors, social workers, therapists, counselors, they've got this special touch. And you're with someone who's got the gift of enablement because they're constantly reading you and attending to your needs, both physically and emotionally, before you even know what your needs are. I have a friend who is terrific with her ability with enablement, with her genius of enablement. And whenever we're at her house for dinner, she's constantly topping up our drinks. She's literally fluffing our pillows. She's changing the chairs we're sitting on to make sure they're as comfortable as possible. And she's serving us in every way possible. I'm often tempted to leave a tip when we leave their house. She's just terrific.
Oh, that person sounds amazing.
She is.
What I love about people with the genius of enablement is that they're amazing teammates. You can always count on them. And when you're in a bind, they're often the first people to volunteer to come and help you. And they're eager to do so. During a leadership retreat I was on, it was a person with enablement that noticed that no one was writing notes for this retreat, and she volunteered to do that. And I was really glad that she did because I didn't want to be the one writing the notes. But it also freed me up to participate in the retreat fully. There's another person that I coached that has the genius of enablement. And this was when I first started coaching early last year, and he volunteered to give me feedback on early coaching sessions, knowing that it would be helpful for me. And he also volunteered to write a testimonial for me too. And so just taking that initiative and really loving to help, it just feels great to be around people with enablement as a genius. Now let's talk about enablement as a frustration. So I have enablement as a frustration. And this is the frustration that I feel most embarrassed about because it makes me seem like I'm unhelpful and I'm not good at helping and you shouldn't ask me for help. I'll give you an example. So, yesterday I spent an hour helping a client troubleshoot some technical issues on Zoom. He's a kind of a more senior client and he's having troubles with his computer and with using a software. And at first, he thought it was a billing issue. And then we tried several different fixes. And finally, we figured out the issue at the end of the hour, but I was exhausted. I was like, spent all my energy. And that felt very much like a lot of enablement work. And you know what the thing was that fixed the issue in the end? It was restarting his computer. Oh, Mark, you also have the frustration of enablement. How do you understand this?
Yeah, for me, again, I can relate to not being super proud of having enablement as a frustration. For me, it feels like having to slow down and not performing or carrying out my work at the speed with which I'd like to because I need to slow down to help somebody else. Before having to help someone or support them, it can often feel like you sort of have to psych yourself up. You take a deep breath, or maybe you sigh. I especially despise it when friends ask me to help them move because that shows how little they know me or care about me because it is just the worst. And I've done it and I still do it, but not without like a lot of muttering and psyching myself up in advance. And then I've mentioned this before, but when something is your frustration, it just takes a lot of energy for you to do that sort of thing. And so enablement individuals like coming alongside others. And part of it is they have to work with this person to get them to do for themselves whatever it is they're trying to achieve. When you think of teachers, especially, or nurses, or anyone who's a physiotherapist who's trying to help someone rehab, they're there with you. They're helping you do it, but they're not doing all of it. And so part of the frustration for me is the part where you have to wait for this person to learn. It's that slow and painful process at the start of learning anything where it just doesn't go well the first time or second time or the first 10 times. And individuals with the gift of enablement, they've got this patience and they're okay with going through the process. They're okay with the time it takes. And I am less okay with that. So that's how it feels for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to just reiterate that it's not about skill, it's about energy and joy and fulfillment. And so anyone can have the skill of helping people, and many people do, but it's just that people with enablement as a frustration don't really get joy and fulfillment out of it. And in fact, it's the opposite, that it drains them of life and drains them of energy.
Yeah, exactly. So then some tips for people with enablement as a genius. These individuals, because they're so helpful, because they're so valuable, really, and they're in that execution pair of the working genius gifts, it's easy for them to get taken advantage of because they're just naturally wanting to help out and make a difference. So it's really important for these individuals to set boundaries, just to be aware of what they can and can't do. Otherwise, people can become reliant on you for certain tasks. Tim, I believe on your leadership team, there are two people with enablement as a genius, and they're the ones who tend to volunteer for the most number of ministries or projects. And so it's natural for people with enablement to see where help is needed and for them to volunteer to help because they really want to just make sure the needs are taken care of. But again, the downside is they're always very busy helping others. Another tip is to use your enablement ability to help the person you're helping grow, help them, teach them to fish rather than giving them fish, kind of thing. And then lastly, it would be helpful to be strategic with your enablement. Depending on your tenacity levels, pick and choose where you can help. If you have enablement, if you have the enablement genius, but tenacity is a frustration, maybe it's best to choose the short, small projects to help with or help for a short period of time. And then if your enablement genius is paired with tenacity as a genius, then you can take on larger projects or help others with whatever more difficult or challenging things they're going through.
Yeah. So here are some tips for people with enablement as a frustration. So first, just avoid all the people that need help. Just run the opposite direction. Just kidding. That would be bad to do. So first, I would say know who on your team or who around you has enablement as a genius and really let them shine in these situations because they are going to want to do this type of work more than you, and it's going to be more fulfilling for them. And so whenever that there's this opportunity, rather than you feeling like you need to go be the one that helps, you can suggest that someone else, or you can suggest and bring that other person along and help. And it ends up being a win-win. A story I remember is on a trip, I had a friend lose his set of car keys. And, he was searching for them, couldn't find them, was asking for help. And I helped him for maybe 1 minute. And then I was like, oh, I'm not going to be very good at this. And I lost interest. And I still wanted to help because, I was in his car and we needed to drive somewhere. And so instead, I galvanized my daughter to help. And I think she has the genius of enablement. And she was really eager to help. And she looked around under all the seats, and she was the one that found the keys. And so,
brilliant.
Instead of me doing the work of the enablement, I just galvanized, which is my genius, someone else to do it.
That's bordering on evil genius, Tim. I love that. That is brilliant.
Yeah. And be sure to appreciate these people because they are so valuable.
Absolutely.
Another tip for if you have enablement as a frustration is if you really need to do the work, just make sure you have that energy because it will cost you more energy than other types of work.
Let's talk about the areas in which individuals with enablement might crave or crush. So if you've got enablement, you crave appreciation, you're crushed by being overlooked. It's important to remember that individuals with the gift of enablement also have needs themselves, and they can get crushed by not having their own needs met or supported. These individuals are naturally trying to make life easy for everyone else. And it even happens with them not letting everyone else know where they're hurting or struggling or could use some help. Because again, they're others centered or oriented first, but this does end up leaving a hole in their own life. And so it's important to remember this if you do work with someone with the gift of enablement, to look after them as well and make sure they're taken care of.
For sure. Now let's jump into talking about what a team without much enablement, genius, or energy is like. This team will feel like there just isn't enough help and support on the team. And this can lead to low morale because people are either feeling underappreciated or undersupported. What could happen is a lot of new initiatives don't get off the ground because there isn't the people that jump in and help kind of move that project forward. And so it can be a challenge in terms of the implementation of projects. And some projects might fall apart due to a lack of help, a lack of the human glue that is needed to keep things going and keep things together. And so this gift of enablement is really important on teams. So that wraps up enablement. Next up, we'll talk about tenacity, and this is the last of the 6 geniuses. Let's start by talking about what the genius of tenacity feels like. Now, I don't have this genius myself, but my wife does, and I've been observing how she and I are very different. This genius of tenacity is about execution. It involves getting things done, achieving results, and having the desired impact of a task or a project. It's kind of taking things to the finish line. And people with tenacity really get joy and energy from crossing things off a task list and knowing that they've met the standards for completion, that there's been a job well done. And they're really comfortable pushing through the obstacles needed to get to the finish line. My wife, she says, if she's working on a task, the closer she gets to the finish line, the more her energy increases. Whereas for me, I have tenacity as a competency. My sort of energy just goes down as I'm doing the task. It doesn't matter how close I am to finishing or not. An example is I usually wash the dishes after dinner. My wife does the cooking and I'll do the washing. And so if my daughters have been baking in the afternoon and my wife has been super creative in her cooking and is using like 7 pots and pans and there's just tons of dishes, I will just stop in the middle of washing dishes because I've run out of energy because that task is just too big. And Olive never stops in the middle. She always is able to push through and just get the job done. She sometimes gets frustrated at me when I stop, right in the middle and I'm like lazing on the couch and not doing anything. Another example is my team at Coracle Marketing, many of them have tenacity as a genius. And I just love working with them because I can assign them some client work and they will just get it done. And oftentimes they'll get it done before the deadline is due.
I can totally relate to the dishes or any household chore. I will for sure stop halfway through. I'm vacuuming the house and I'll just stop halfway through the living room and go sit down on the couch and start watching TV just for a few minutes so I can get my energy back and get back to it. And my wife she just walks by and looks at me. She's like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm vacuuming. Can't you tell? So what I love about people with the genius of tenacity, they get things done, man. They're just very productive. They're task oriented or focused. It's just the most attractive trait, really. They help their team turn ideas into actual results. Sometimes I think people with tenacity just enjoy pain. They're like the ultra marathoners, the athletes. They just enjoy something about that struggle and that pain that comes with having to stick with something for a really long time. It makes them feel alive in some weird way. And then they stick with it long enough that they get to enjoy the fruit of their labor at the very end, which I wouldn't know anything about because I'm just sitting on the couch watching TV at that point. What does the frustration of tenacity feel like for you, Tim?
Well, I don't have this as a frustration, but I've coached many people that have this as a frustration. And so I just remember one week where I coached a pastor, a writer, and a manager, and all of them asked the same question, but in different words. And that question was, how do I become more productive? I have so many things on my task list, but I'm frustrated that I can't get them all done and I feel unproductive. And so that's what frustration of tenacity can feel like, especially if you have a lot of that type of work that you need to do, is that you just run out of energy, especially if it's like you need to do it during the day in your day job. And in the evening, you've got your own household tasks to do. And you're wanting to get those done as well, but you've just used up all of your tenacity energy and you just don't have any of that left. And so that's kind of what it feels like with people with the frustration of tenacity.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, with tenacity being a frustration for myself, it's just having to grind through something, especially at the very end of the project. That's where it gets especially draining or frustrating. As I mentioned in an earlier episode, I'm great at rough drafts. I can go from 0 to 60, if we use a car analogy, very quickly, very easily. But then it's going from 60% complete in a project or 70% complete to 90% complete. That's where it takes a lot more effort. Probably takes me 3 times as long to go from 70 to 90% complete than it does from going 0 to 60. That's what having tenacity as a frustration feels like.
Yeah, I can relate to that because it's a competence for me. But for larger tasks, I do find like I need to get into the task. I can't just jump in right away. And oftentimes it'll be like putzing around, looking like I'm not doing anything, but I'm just kind of gathering energy to get started. So let's talk about tips for people with a genius of tenacity. So one tip is to make sure you have uninterrupted time to work. And so people that I've coached have said that they need that time and space to get into this zone and be really productive. And they can work hours and hours on end on kind of one task or one project and just keep on going. Oftentimes you'll get interrupted by phone calls, emails, texts, or colleagues just coming by to chat. And all those things can interrupt your flow. And so to make sure you have some sort of blocked off time I remember reading the book Deep Work by Cal Newport, and he talks about the importance of having large chunks of time to really dive deep into your work. And I think those times are especially important for people with tenacity as a genius. Another tip is to understand really where your largest value is at. What to the team, anyways. So, what tenacity geniuses can do better than anyone else is to take on those like large volumes of work and get them done in a timely manner and at a certain standard. And so, if you are one of the only people with tenacity as a genius, be strategic about what projects you take on. The smaller projects that are maybe easier to finish, other people that don't have the tenacity of genius, they can take those on. And where you shine is really those larger projects that other people seem to shrink away from. Another tip is not to apply tenacity thinking to every conversation. And so people with tenacity as a genius also think differently because they're thinking about, okay, what are the deadlines? What are the steps to get this project done? Who's going to do what? And it's very much kind of down to the detail because they're thinking about how to get things finished. But that type of thinking is not always helpful, especially if a conversation is in wonder, invention, discernment. If you're jumping all the way to thinking about those tenacity details, then it's probably too soon to start thinking about them because you haven't even decided which way to go yet. One example is that there's a leader that I coached, and he worked with a colleague that had wonder as a genius, and he had tenacity as a genius. And every time she had those wonder type conversations with him, he would always interpret that as work that needed to be done because he was putting on his tenacity cap and thinking about, oh, how do I get this job done or this task done? But that wonder type of conversation isn't about getting things done. It's just about exploration. And so a lot of those conversations, you don't need to apply your tenacity, energy, your thinking to it because it's still very early on in the process. So you can wait until later to apply that tenacity thinking or the tenacity energy.
Some tips for people with the frustration of tenacity, such as myself: get tenacity help. Delegate that part of the project or that phase of the project to someone with tenacity as a genius. Subcontract the work out. There's nothing wrong with that. We need teams to achieve things, and there's nothing wrong with handing off parts of the project that you struggle with to others. Do the tenacity work with other people. I've got a friend who doesn't love admin. He's definitely got galvanizing it as a gift. And so he created something called admin parties for the fellow customer success individuals that work at the software company he works at. And so they all get together, I think around 4 p.m. every day, and they all do their paperwork together over Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And it's just a way to get energy from others in order to do the type of work you don't really enjoy doing. In this case, it is administrative. You can schedule your tenacity work and choose the part of the day where you've got the most energy to do that tough work, that tough slog. For me, it's first thing in the morning. I just like to get the hard, annoying stuff out of the way. So I do my workouts in the morning. And when I was studying for financial exam stuff, I would do the hardest part of my studying first thing in the morning, usually before the kids even wake up. And then you can do tenacity sprints. So schedule in 30 minutes of tenacity work, then take a break and come back to it later, which I often do. I remember when I was in grade 6 having to type up a book report, or it wasn't a book report, it was just a really long report. And I would type 3 paragraphs, stop, take a break, go back, type 3 more paragraphs, stop, take a break. That was the only way I was able to get through it because it was monotonous, tedious, tenacity type work.
Yeah. And even for me with tenacity as a competence, I may have a little bit more capacity to do tenacity work than you, but it still is limited. And so I use the Pomodoro Technique. So basically it's like working for a chunk of time and then taking a break and then working for another chunk of time and taking a break. And you basically split up your day like that. And so for me, I found 1 hour chunks is sort of how much work I can do before I need a break. And so that's kind of how I'll schedule my day. I'll do an hour, I'll take a break, come back and do another hour. And then, maybe it's a lunch break. And then, maybe it's a few meetings. And so, yeah, just limiting how much tenacity work that I do.
Very cool.
So let's talk about what people with a genius of tenacity, what they crave and what they're crushed by.
Mm.
So what they crave is clarity. And this was a big one in the team sessions that I did. People with a genius of tenacity, they just want to know, what is the assignment? What is the task? What does finished look like? Because that's their goal. That's what they're aiming for. And so the opposite of that, they're crushed by, and that is ambiguity. When it's unclear, it's frustrating. When they're not sure what finished looks like or what they really need to do, they get frustrated, and they're crushed by that because they really just want to know how to get the task done.
So what does a team look like when it doesn't have tenacity? Well, it's pretty evident they don't often finish the work that they started to do. They fail to complete projects or initiatives, and there are a lot of loose ends for projects. Or even if they do finish it, the project starts to stall near the end or gets sloppy. Maybe it just takes too long to achieve a project, or the project or work just seems to have some unfinished parts to it, or it just gets a little bit messy. I know I've been guilty of this with some of my work. That's all I got.
Okay.
Just there, right there. That's exactly what it's like. Just ran out of energy. I'm done.
Ran out of energy. This podcast is getting too long for Mark. Okay, this wraps up our deep dives on all the stages of work. And our next episode, we're going to be talking about working genius in teams.
Until next time, everybody.
All right, goodbye.
Take care.